Chapter. We're going to talk about electric vehicles, and we have Leslie Zebrowitz with us. Professor Zebrowitz is Professor Emeritus at Brandeis University, and you're a professor at social psychology. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And so, first of all, tell us, what is social psychology?
So social psychology tries to understand how human behavior is influenced by the social environment, by other people, and so on. So social psychologists study a variety of things. They study aggression, they study love, they study interpersonal relationships, they study cooperation and competition, they study first impressions, which is what I studied most of the time. So there are a lot of different topics.
So it's a little bit different than, say, what we usually talk about a psychologist. You go to a psychologist because you have a personal problem or a phobia or whatever it is.
Exactly. So when I go to parties, people say, oh my God, you can read my mind. I'm not going to talk to you. And I say, no, I don't know anything about that. And I can't help anybody with their problems.
So you came out with this wonderful book. I read it years ago, and I really loved it. It's called Reading Faces. And it really delved into what a face is and the first impressions that we make when we see somebody, right? We make observations about them. Some of these observations you say are correct or maybe correct. Others are not necessarily correct. Can you tell us this? We're going to talk about electric vehicles in a minute, but I was so impressed with this book. That's why I want to talk about it.
So the question I really was addressing is why do we form first impressions from faces? More important, why do people agree with each other in the impressions they form? What is it in the face that is driving these impressions?
Right.
So I came up with these hypotheses that I called overgeneralization effects. And the idea is if an adult's face resembles something that does have meaning, then we overgeneralize and we think that person has related traits. So baby face overgeneralization is one thing I studied. Babies' faces have a characteristic structure. Some adults look more baby-faced than others, and it turns out that the adults who look more baby-faced are perceived to have the kind of traits that babies are perceived to have. And in fact, the babies do have them. The adults may or may not. And so there are other overgeneralization hypotheses.
Yeah, but this goes into like the criminal justice system. So people with different faces have different outcomes and also in our election campaigns, because people want to in your book you say people want a mature face to be the leader, right?
Right. So people like competence and they like trustworthiness. There's some cultural differences. So in the United States, power and competence seem to hold more sway. In Eastern cultures, it seems that trustworthiness is also important, and there are different facial qualities that would yield those impressions.
Yeah, so let's go now to, like, this is really, I could have a whole conversation about this because I found this a really interesting book and interesting ideas. And you talk a lot about, for example, honesty. You can't really, when we see a person, we say this person is honest or this person is not, and you say that's not necessarily a good evaluation. Yeah.
True. To the extent that there is accuracy, it's a very small effect. It's not something you would want to rely on in making any important decisions. You'd want to get other information, for sure.
So how did you become involved in electric vehicles?
How did I become involved in electric vehicles? It was kind of really happenstance. So I bought an electric vehicle. I had a 17-year-old car, and I needed a new car, and I wanted one that would ultimately, I hoped, provide self-driving so that when I was too old to drive, my car could take me places. And electric vehicles seem to maybe promise that. We'll see. And I did care about climate. I had been really concerned about climate change. So I bought an electric car in the spring of 2019, and I had then I had just joined a climate group,
Yes.
350 Mass, the Newton node where I live. And I met someone there. A couple months later, he sent an email to everyone saying, does anyone want to co-chair an electric vehicle task force in Newton? So I volunteered. No, he didn't say co-chair. Does anyone want to be on it? So I volunteered, but I was the only one who volunteered. So I became the co-chair. So, and that's where it started. And Newton, it turns out, I didn't know it at the time, has a climate action plan, and they have goals for the adoption of electric vehicles. They want to reduce greenhouse gases in many ways, and that was one. So we got to work trying to figure out how to persuade everyone in Newton to buy an electric vehicle the next time they need a car. You wouldn't want to buy it when you don't need a car. That's definitely not good for the environment.
So a lot of people are thinking about electric vehicles right now.
Yes.
But they seem to be expensive. Is that true?
Well, they're expensive. They're not as much more expensive than gas-powered vehicles typically, except that now I gather that dealers are jacking up the prices because they can, because they're in scarce supply. But before this supply chain issue, for an equivalent quality car that's powered by gas, the electric vehicle is not that much more expensive. And there are subsidies that you can get that reduce the price. So there are state subsidies. You can get $2,500 back on a fully electric vehicle, and federal tax credits. You've been able to get $7,500 back. So that would take $10,000 off the price. So it really brings it down a lot.
So how would you compare driving an electric car to driving a gas car? Is it different?
Yes, I like it a lot more. I never cared about cars very much before. It's much smoother, it's quieter, and what I really like is the acceleration. You know, I wasn't a drag racer before I got this car, but I always lamented trying to get onto the highway in my 4-cylinder car and having to wait until it seemed safe. With this car, I know I can just merge right into traffic and not worry about it.
So before there were just a couple of models, the Nissan Leaf. I mean, I remember looking at that about 5 years ago, and of course Tesla. Now, how many models are there?
Oh, I don't know if I can count. There are at least 50 electric vehicles, and then there are maybe 40 plug-in hybrids, and there might be more now. The last list I compiled, we're updating it for 2023. So they're all kinds. They're trucks, they're SUVs, they're sedans, they're Jeep kind of cars. They're anything you want, you can get in an electric
now
car.
you can get the Ford F-150.
Correct.
Right. That's kind of a game changer, people have said.
Yeah, I think across the country it's maybe the most popular vehicle.
Yes, that's right. And when they put it out, they had more orders than they thought that they were going to make, and they just can't.
Yeah, that's
fulfill
true.
the orders.
It's still,
Right.
I think it's back ordered. They're all back ordered now. It's really. I just went to this fair yesterday, and was telling people about electric vehicles, and a lot of people said, "We want to buy one, we can't find one." So. And one guy said, "Oh, his is just coming off the boat from Germany." So
tell me about range anxiety.
Range anxiety. So people worry that they're not going to be able to find a charging station when they're on a long trip, and the worries are a little bit exaggerated because the range is a lot more than it used to be. The average range is between 200 and 250 miles. Some cars over 300, and they seem to be going up. In the beginning days, it would be like 125 miles maybe.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that there are a lot of charging stations that people are unaware of because there's just not any signage. But if you have an electric car, you have an app on your phone and it shows you where they all are. You don't have to have an electric car. You can Google it and you can see where they all are. But there still aren't enough on the highways, I would say. And the Inflation Reduction, no, it's really the infrastructure bill,
Right.
Provided a lot of money to put chargers on all the highways. And so all the main roads in Massachusetts, for example, are going to be guaranteed to have a charging station or stations at least every 50 miles.
Right.
And
Right.
so that's plenty good.
So you just mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act there, and it gives good money and taxes and incentives for electric vehicle owners, right? Can you try? I know it's very complicated.
It's complicated. It's so from the time it was signed on August 16th till the end of the year, any car to be eligible for the tax credit has to be assembled in North America. And there is a short list of cars that fulfill that. So a lot of electric vehicles that used to be eligible for $7,500 are no longer eligible. And this is because the government is really trying to ramp up domestic production.
Right.
Then starting in 2023, that rule will still be in place, and other additional, more restrictive rules are going to be added. So there's going to be a cap on the sales price of a car: $55,000 for a sedan, $80,000 for an SUV or a truck.
Yeah, to be eligible for the $7,500 rebate.
And then there's also going to be a cap on income: $300,000 for a couple, $150,000 for a single person, $225,000 for a head of household. There also are going to be restrictions on how the battery is sourced. And there are two parts to that ordinary mortals will not be able to figure out. We're going to have to rely on the automobile companies to tell us whether their car meets it.
A certain percentage of the battery has
to be sourced. It's where
domestic.
It's where the minerals come from. Not
necessarily.
And I don't know if it's necessarily domestic. It's going to change over time. This goes from 2023 to 2032, so the percentage goes up over time. So it's the minerals and it's the components. But another good thing about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is not so restrictive, is now they're going to be giving rebates for used cars. So it's $4,000, I think, or up to 30% of the cost. I don't have that. It's at least $4,000. There is an income restriction, so I think maybe $100,000 for a family and $75,000 for a single person. Don't quote me on that because I don't have it all in my head. So they're trying to make it more egalitarian. There's been this criticism of electric vehicles; they're just for rich people, and the goal is to have it be for everyone. And in fact, people who live in neighborhoods where there's lots of air pollution would benefit even more from having electric vehicles.
So we get this $7,500 credit, maybe.
I should say up to. So when it's a tax credit, if you don't pay $7,500 in taxes,
yes,
you don't get $7,500. If you only pay $5,000 in taxes, that's all you get. But they want to change it so it's at a point of purchase
incentive that lowers
so anyone
the price.
can use it. It doesn't depend on your tax burden. You can just go to the dealer, you buy the car, and you get the money off.
Yeah. So, by the way, this is a report from the climate crisis. I'm Kameel Nasr, and I have the pleasure of having Leslie Zebrowitz with us here. So, can you tell us about how much electric vehicle costs? What's the range? I know Rolls-Royce came up with one that cost, I think, $300,000.
I think most of them cost between $30,000 and $50,000.
Really, 30.
Yeah.
So
30 and 50. So you can find some that are way expensive.
Right.
But at least half of them are in that mid-range, and that's before any kind of tax credit.
Right.
I should note that Massachusetts also has tax credits, and they have different contingencies, but you can get, in 2023, you can get up to $5,000.
So that 30 to 50,000, that's about what people pay for a gas car, right?
The thing is that most people don't buy a new gas car. Most people buy a used one,
so
they're a lot less.
Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned that it was hard to get electric vehicles, as they don't. It's even harder to get right now a used electric vehicle because there just aren't that many around.
Right.
And most people buy used cars.
Most people do, right.
Yeah.
So hopefully there will be more in the future, and the incentive will help people to be able to buy them. And there are some, but it's the early it would be like a Leaf. You could find a Leaf because they, as you mentioned, were one of the first electric vehicles.
So there's a lot of new battery technologies come out. The price of the battery when Tesla first came on the scene was somewhere in the range of $700 a kilowatt hour. It's come down to about 130. People think it might come down to 100, which was the point where it would be comparable to buying a regular gas car. Are you familiar with what's going on in battery technology? I know Tesla is spending a lot of money.
I don't really know a lot about it, but I should say that I do know that the price of batteries is coming down. But another thing is that even if you pay a little more for an electric vehicle, in the long run, even before the price of batteries came down, it was forecast that it would cost you less to own that car. And that's because there's almost no maintenance for an electric vehicle.
Right.
You know, a gas-powered car has a gazillion parts, and when I would go, my car was making a noise, I had no idea what they were talking about. And I think, you know, a gas-powered car, I think they said has 20 moving parts, and a electric has, I said it backwards. The
electric has 200, and the gas-powered has 2,000.
I think less than 200, something like that.
Yes.
And the other thing, the one thing is brakes. You know, all cars have brakes, but you don't wear the brakes out on an electric car because there's this regenerative braking. You take your foot off the gas, and that regenerates the battery, but also it slows the car down, so you almost never have to step on the brakes.
Yeah. So I'll say that Volkswagen is really big, and it's trying to out Tesla, and they spent a few years ago $29 billion on battery technology, and they're teaming up with a QuantumScape. They own 50% of QuantumScape, which is trying to get a solid-state battery out by 2025. But I wanted to ask you a little about the mining that's involved for batteries. So lithium is what the batteries have become now. They have to do a lot of ecological damage to get to mine lithium. Could you talk about that?
Well, again, I'm not super expert on that, but I do know that there are more sustainable ways to mine lithium that don't destroy the landscape and that use salt. I'm forgetting what it's called, but they extract it really from sand, in the sand with the salt.
Yeah.
And lithium is very plentiful in the world.
Yes.
So that's really not the problem, I don't think so much. It's certainly, you can mine lithium with much less ecological damage. You can also do damage, but if you do it certain ways, there's not damage. And it doesn't compare to the damage caused by fracking or drilling for oil. The problem is the minerals of cobalt and some
nickel. Yeah.
So cobalt is mostly mined in Africa, and the mining is abusive they have children doing the work, and so that's a problem. That problem could be fixed, if people were willing to pay more to get it out. They're also looking for alternatives, and I think there's a lot of research and development trying to get around having to use cobalt. And they're also doing a lot of recycling of cobalt. I mean, it's in your cell phone too. So it's something that old cell phones, they can take the cobalt out and reuse it, or old car batteries for that matter too. Right.
So so the damage is done by extracting petroleum, oil, and natural gas is worse than mining lithium. I
would say it's worse because it's not only what it does to the landscape, but it's what it does to the air, to the greenhouse gas emissions. Right. That's what we're trying to do something about.
So, but what about, I buy an electric car and I plug it into my house, and the house gets its gets its energy from, if you're in the Boston area, that a lot of the electricity comes from a plant between Boston and Everett. It's a very dirty plant. It uses mostly natural gas and some oil. So you're kind of transferring.
Well, no, I'll say two things. One is that an electric car, even if it's fueled on electricity made with coal, is still cleaner than a gas-powered car. Okay, not as much cleaner as it is if it's fueled by green power. The town I live in has, by default, we aggregated our electricity. By default, 80% of it comes from renewables. And you can opt up to 100%, which I did. So presumably my car is all powered by renewables. If you put solar on your roof, then then you don't even have to pay for the electricity. Yeah. Well, there's part of it I think they still make you pay for. I have too many trees for solar, so I haven't done that. But so it's better. It's not as good, but it's better, and it's not. Yeah.
So how much about? So if you wanted to fill up your car, you're paying whatever it is now, $4 a gallon, let's say. How much does that cost for a comparable price?
It's a lot less, the electricity,
about
to fuel it.
$1?
I think it might be half the price to fuel it with electricity, maybe less than that. I mean, it depends. Obviously, gasoline goes up and down, but well, so does electricity.
So do you think we have enough power in the grid?
From what I've read, we do have enough power. I just read an article today that there's a very small percentage of the power in the grid that is used to fuel electric vehicles, even if we had a lot more.
Yeah.
But we also need to improve the grid because we want to get people's homes all heated by electricity as well, and then we want to get as much manufacturing as possible.
So as a psychologist, I know that you've talked about the psychological barriers that stop us from really taking the climate issue seriously and kicking it down the road and so on. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I give a whole hour and a half lecture on this. So there are a lot of psychological barriers. I mean, one is human beings are kind of focused on the short term, and so a cost today weighs more heavily in a decision than a savings tomorrow, even if the net gain would be better if you paid the cost today. So we're kind of penny wise and pound foolish. That's why we have all these aphorisms to point out our flaws, right? And another thing is that the danger of greenhouse gas emissions is not the kind of danger maybe we evolved to respond to. Carbon dioxide is ubiquitous. It's not like some strange gas that that we never heard of before, and it's been around forever. And
you can't see it or taste it.
You can't see it, right? Exactly. Yeah. So it's a different kind of danger, and when we finally see all the ecological disasters that are now being attributed to climate changes, that makes people respond more. Especially people who it's really hit. We just had this huge storm in Alaska and another huge storm in Puerto Rico, I think, but memories are short. There was this horrible hurricane in New York that flooded all the subways, but now
everything's okay.
Yeah, except the poor people who were hit hard, they're not maybe okay.
No. I think we've changed a bit in the last couple of years because we've been hit with heat and flood and
fire.
Drought and fire.
It's like the apocalypse.
Yeah, and even here in New England, we've had across Europe. They've had heat and tremendous drought that they haven't seen before.
Yeah, so France, I was just hearing about.
So are we waking up as a population?
I think we are, but things just move more slowly than maybe is good enough. I hope not.
What would you like to see? more climate activism, people on the streets protesting.
I would like to see the government declare a climate emergency and treat it like they would treat a war, you know,
Yes.
and put the money behind it and the, you know, and the powers of the government to get companies to do what they need to do. I don't think that's going to happen now.
And then there's another issue of the cost of climate. You know, people are saying it's in this infrastructure. I mean, Inflation Reduction Act, and also the Infrastructure Act. There's a lot of money going into the climate, and it's just really not enough, right? We have to probably spend trillions, not billions.
It's
to change
probably
things
not
around.
enough. I mean, it's a start, but it's not enough. And again, the thing is that people are short-term thinkers. You know, if they don't stop this, it's going to cost even more to repair the damage.
But a lot of people are parents, and they are parents more likely to take the climate issue seriously.
I don't know. I think maybe grandparents are. I'm a grandparent. So in a lot of the organizations that I belong to are like older people. They have the time to put into it. Parents are really busy, you know. They're working, they're taking care of kids. It's, you know, I think their heart would be in it maybe more than people who didn't have kids.
Yeah.
But I don't think they have the bandwidth to do as much as older people or college age kids. It's young people are very active. You know, this is their future that they're saying, you know, our generation has destroyed. So
anyway, this is Report from the Climate Act, from the Climate Crisis.